voice of growth, mastering the mind and market.
Founded a company, ILLUME Advising, in 2013, exited in May. I got my first job in energy from a Craigslist ad in the Bay Area. So I think all businesses, whether they recognize it or not, are directly tied to the well-being of the people they serve. The survival of your business depends on your strategy and your ability to adapt to these different market conditions. The hardest thing you can do in a business is change management. Are we doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Are we making the right decisions? Are we taking care of people the way we should? How are we going to get that next generation up and trained when we're automating their jobs? The only conversations I've heard so far in business is this is going to be really great and super efficient. And underneath the word efficient usually means fewer people.
Yeah.
Chase what you have energy for. I think I did all these things and still kept true to some of those orientations. And that's like what I kind of hold to. But I'm passionate about people.
And you're a builder.
I am a builder. That's right.
Tell us what you've built.
Well, I've built many things, but I think you're asking about my company. So I founded a company, ILLUME Advising, in 2013, exited in May of this year. So, last year, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a research consultancy that focused on the energy industry. So our primary goal with building ILLUME was to bring the human dimensions of energy challenges into the center of energy solutions. So typically, you probably, your way around tech,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Yeah. Typically with energy technologies, you really focus on like the utility of the technology, the technical adequacy of it, but rarely do we deal with the human systems surrounding those technologies. And in the case of like operating buildings or operating houses, cities, you have to bring human factors into your technical assessments. And so we started just the two of us, my business partner, Sarah, and I, and we grew it from 2 people to 50 over those 12 years of running the organization. And then decided, as one of my mentors said, we needed to wear new boots, try something else on. And so we decided to exit at that point.
And give us an example of what a human factors in technology project is. Like, what was a very typical project you might have worked on?
Oh, gosh, our projects vary dramatically. So we worked on issues of equity and policy translation. So who gets served with what and how you measure the impacts of that funding. We did work related to the energy grid nexus. So how do you move markets to adopt technologies that support the resiliency of the electric grid? We also looked at what I would consider sort of technologies in micro environments. So you've installed a new thermostat. How do we get you to engage with that thermostat in a way that reduces demand on the electric grid and then aggregate those behaviors across hundreds of thousands of households into impacts that system planners can rely on? So highly technical work and also highly qualitative work. So we had a team of data scientists working on our projects, looking at impacts, running sophisticated models, and then qualitative researchers, ethnographers, and others kind of really dealing with the human elements of it. And then, of course, all these experts in between in sort of markets and energy program implementation, policy, et cetera.
Super niche-y.
It's super niche-y, and it was great.
So how'd that happen? You woke up one day and you're like, you're going to make a very niche-y company, or did it sort of accidentally sort of form?
I'm kind of a niche-y person. I think, no, I got my first job in energy from a Craigslist ad in the Bay Area. So my background's in the social sciences. I started working in consumer product brand strategy using research, qualitative research and observational research to support our clients in merchandising and product launches. And then really found that soul-sucking at some point. I was like, I can't keep doing this for computers and crayons and these different technologies. And I wanted sort of trickier problems. So I applied for a job on Craigslist for this, consulting role in energy. And I literally had to call someone. I was like, so tell me how energy works. Like, let's talk about how this actually functions, how these systems function, and you know, did well, I guess, in my interview and was hired and started running projects at a time when the energy industry, particularly in California, was looking at these human challenges. So I was running evaluation projects, multi-million-dollar research projects focused on moving the California public and the market toward greenhouse gas reduction
Mhm.
goals and achieving those through a series of programs. And I built a reputation over the course of those 5 or 6 years that I was with that firm as an expert in the behavioral dimensions
Mhm.
of energy, and then launched my company on the back of that.
Interesting.
So, so in many ways, I sort of applied my education, my training to, a challenge, a different set of challenges.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that's really a brilliant move because
yeah,
you basically leaped off your own strengths, your own background
yeah,
into something brand new and you sort of like molded them together, which is
yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah, and, at the time, well, thank you. When we launched the company, we were also kind of intervening in the business model of
Mhm.
consulting. So one of our primary goals was to think about leveraging the flexibility of consulting for the purpose of creating a better environment and work environment for our employees.
Mhm.
So rather than adopting like the McKinsey model, which is sort
Mhm.
of grinds your junior people into the ground and you get as much billability out of them, and sort of build your business that
Mhm.
way. We thought, how can we create sort of a humane environment for consulting,
Mhm.
and one that was really focused on honoring the lives of our employees and also women in the workplace as well. So we provided a lot of flexibility to parents and to really brilliant folks in that really challenging period of life where
Yeah.
you're sort of in peak career and peak family
Yeah.
and you need the flexibility to succeed and continue to advance. And so we, in addition to sort of focusing on the human dimensions of energy, we were focusing on the human dimensions of consulting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I want to come back to the human dimensions of consulting. We'll put a
Yeah.
bookmark on that.
Sure.
But I want to talk really quickly about why tech companies, energy companies, why these companies should care about the human side.
Well, first of all, fundamentally, you need a consumer base,
Yeah.
period. And so I think all businesses, whether they recognize it or not, are directly tied to the well being of the people they serve, right? You need people to have lives that are dynamic, that
Mhm.
are flourishing, that they're able to build, a income that essentially supports your business. And very few companies, I think about their role that way. But utilities fundamentally have to. And so when energy is very
Mhm.
place-based, utilities are place-based, unlike a multinational firm that can kind of pick up its operations and
Right.
move to another region. They have to tend to the well-being of their public and also the way that that public's behaviors impact this infrastructure that they're responsible for and these commodities they're required to
Mhm.
provide. And so more than anyone, I think they're in this like deeply symbiotic relationship with the public. And for years, electricity companies didn't have to worry about that.
Mhm.
We had enough supply to meet
Mhm.
demand. We had infrastructure that was relatively new and functioning well. And we're in sort of the exact opposite place right now. Demand is outpacing supply. Development is growing dramatically,
Mhm.
particularly when you're dealing with data centers and hyperscalers and all of these sort of complex energy systems that we're adding to the electric
Mhm.
grid, electric vehicles. And you just have to pay attention to those behaviors, those market dynamics, and those relationships. And the reality is, frankly, the public can make or break your rate case. The public can
Mhm.
make or break your ability to cite, a new development in a region. And so you need to pay attention to the well-being of the people in those regions as well.
Yeah, you're not gonna pick up and move my what do you call it? My meter over there, right?
Yeah.
It's stuck.
Yeah. And this is where you are, and this is where your lights are, and this is where
Yeah.
your life is. And I mean, it's fascinating. So I did an interview at ILLUME. We used to do this magazine. We'd publish it once a year. And I had this really great interview with Michael Terrell, who heads Google's like environmental investments and
Mhm.
energy initiatives. And at the time, he completely blew my mind because he was talking about managing these data centers across a global environment.
Mhm.
So distributing sort of the workload, if you will, of these data centers to be active where energy was the cheapest and operating not only on a 24-hour time
Mhm.
horizon, which we're accustomed to in the US, but also on a global time horizon. And I thought that was really fascinating because it creates this opportunity, if you will, to optimize both locally and globally at the same time. Now, they're one of the few companies that have both the scale and the sophistication to do that.
Mhm.
But as we get more and more built out as AI proliferates,
Yeah.
these kinds of sophisticated ways of managing energy are going to be increasingly important. So I think that's kind of an interesting new horizon for our space.
Nice. Next question
Yeah.
is, I believe you are uniquely qualified to give your insights to,
Okay.
because not everybody understands that data centers
Hmm.
are not just a binary decision,
Yeah.
kind of pun intended there.
Yeah.
So give us some of the human aspects, give us some of the policy aspects, just give us your take on the data centers that we all
Yeah.
need. We're needing more and
Hmm.
more, but communities are pushing back quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, they're pushing back for a number of reasons because we haven't, I think, fundamentally resolved the question of, nor do I think we ever will, what is the goal of AI in our society? So I think in some ways what you're seeing in community pushback around data centers is more of an existential pushback around, I don't know if I want this technology. I don't know if I want you in my backyard. Are you here to provide good for me or are you here to take my job? And not only are you doing all of this in my backyard, you may be increasing the cost of my electric
Hmm.
bills, and you may be using the precious water resources we have that, as we all know, is not a renewable resource. So the conversation that communities are having are not, stop, I don't want it. They're, what's in it for me?
Hmm.
Always, right? But then I think secondarily, what are we trying to do here? What is the project
Hmm.
that we're embarking on? And people don't say it, they don't use those terms, but when you get into conversations and you read across the anxieties, it's about the future. It's about, what are we really attempting to
Hmm.
achieve? Is this technology for technology's sake, or is it technology that's going to actually better my life?
Hmm.
And if we are going to be successful in this kind of development, this scale of development, we need to answer that question. And it's a fair and real question. I was just talking to a friend. We were on a walk
Hmm.
and we were talking about this concept of surplus populations. Have you heard this term? And I
No,
can't
what is that?
quote the academic who named this because I was just talking about this. It's this idea that, economies, in particular capitalism, have a tendency to create populations that can't participate in the system.
I see what you mean.
And the more that we consolidate jobs and wealth, the more surplus populations we have,
Mm.
if you will.
Yeah.
And we are in a moment where I think people are feeling that and have seen that. And that's been going on in the United States for some time now. And we don't have a good social response to dealing with people who are not in the workforce. And so when you are a parent, like in my case, sending my child to college and wondering, what job is there on the other side?
Yeah.
And if you're lucky like me, how much money do I need to set aside just in case this kid can't get a job?
Yeah.
You know, and this is the best case scenario, right?
Yeah.
What do you think your average, working class community member is thinking? And so
Yeah.
what we need to see is AI and data centers and the communities or the companies that are trying to site them in communities come up with a better value proposition for the public. We also have situations that are even worse for communities, like where there's actual pollution happening
Yeah.
and there's this sort of degradation of the sort of microenvironment surrounding or the community surrounding it. And there needs to be responsibility around that. And policymakers are rightly asking, who's covering the cost?
Hmm.
Should the public pay through the system, if you will, to be able to online all of this technology? And typically the answer is no. right?
Hmm.
That's the general consensus. I don't think people disagree with that. But the mechanisms to recover cost are complicated and they're distributed across the grid. So there are new and kind of innovative policy models that are emerging that are figuring out ways to share cost. And I like to think, even though a lot of folks think about distributed generation as being this really valuable thing for
Hmm.
these large commercial sided projects, I think for the purposes of the public and for reliability, it's better that these are all utility connected.
Mm.
And you can create microgrids and do really dynamic things to make sure that they also
Hmm.
serve the community in different ways if they're self-generating. But without that sort of tether, if you will, to the responsibility of the grid and the public, we really don't have a guarantee of the sort of outcomes surrounding those
Hmm.
developments. And I think the public's smart.
Yeah.
They know that. We haven't figured it out. We don't have the answers. And so this is why we have all this pushback. But everyone's working on it. I mean, hopefully I'll
Yeah.
be working on something very similar to it soon. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
We've been having lots of conversations at the podcast with
Mm.
people at all levels of the AI
Mhm.
framework,
Yeah.
from people that are in security, people
Yeah.
that are in policy, people that are coding,
Yeah.
people that are using it. And so the data center piece of it is what people sometimes don't really think about,
Mhm.
but it's in our backyard. We've
Yeah.
had this big discussion with Project Blue lately, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next. You normally say like 5, 10 years, but I'm going to say like 1, 3
Yeah,
years.
1 to 3
It's
easily.
it's insane.
It's moving so fast. And I think that's the challenge. I was talking to an investor recently and I thought he summarized it well. He goes, "We just have to make sure that what we're providing isn't just a better version of our Google search."
Hmm.
That like the general public is receiving a benefit that exceeds that.
Hmm.
But the benefits for business are obvious, right? Um, will those benefits then extend outside
Hmm.
of business is a question we have to answer.
Do you
And
use AI?
I do all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. And in my previous role, when I was the chief strategy officer for eSource, which is the company that acquired us, I was supporting them on an internal AI
Hmm.
initiative and development project. And that was fun because they have a really great AI lead who is, founded and built and sold companies in the
Hmm.
space and is really, really thoughtful. And it was fun to work with him and really get into the nerdy aspects of building models and thinking about ensuring quality.
Do you think that ILLUME and eSource in
Hmm.
particular and companies like that
Hmm.
are going to be decimated or augmented or untouched with AI?
I've all of the above, I think. I think the reality is that the survival of your business depends on your strategy and your ability to adapt to these different market conditions, and some are going to absolutely be decimated. I think it depends on how commoditized your offering is. My bigger concern is not can these businesses survive? Like, if they survive, what does that look
Hmm.
like? And how do we train up a workforce behind this sort of tier of experts who are running these organizations and whose expertise is required to effectively engage with AI? How are we going to get that next generation up and trained when we're automating their jobs?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've said repeatedly to people I've talked to about this is that you can't have an AI strategy without a reskilling strategy, without a workforce development strategy. It's not enough to think about your models in the abstract and what they might
Hmm.
do to create efficiencies in your business. You have to bring people along with you, or you may find yourself without the resources and the skills you need to really run those. And at the time, right now, we need discernment, we need expertise, we need folks who are really capable of both understanding how these models work and
Hmm.
function, and then how to apply them. And I don't think most people can do that
Hmm.
right now.
I had a podcast interview with Steve Zylstra of the
Mhm.
Tech
Oh, yeah,
Council.
yeah.
I know you're on the board.
Mhm.
And my question for you is, how do you see the region here,
Mhm.
there, we'll say Arizona in general,
Yeah.
as your sort of area there? How do you see Arizona dealing with workforce with AI? We have already talked about the data center side,
Yeah.
reskilling. How do you see the region dealing with these sort of things?
That's a good question. So, in my mind, I think that comes back to what are sort of the regulatory and policy goals of investing in
Hmm.
these technologies? How do we take those goals and translate them into practical programs, initiatives, and investment portfolios, either in the public or private
Hmm.
sector? And then how do we scale that? And right now, the state, for example, and our regulators don't really have a point of view on any of this. And I think that's really critical when we talk about the types of businesses we're
Hmm.
trying to locate here and how we're going to really build out. So I think in the end, what we'll probably see is more leadership come forward through innovation, hopefully in our community
Hmm.
colleges, innovation in our university systems, and maybe even in grassroots workforce development. And those things will be very critical, I think, to building out, a workforce that can deal with AI. The only conversations I've heard so far in businesses, this is going to be really great and super efficient. And underneath the word efficient usually means fewer people,
Yeah.
right?
So you're saying that the tech bros don't have all the answers for us?
No, no.
I heard this, and I actually I ascribe to this phrase. And the more I've thought about it, is AI is not going to replace, is not going to take your job. Someone that knows how to use AI very well is
Hmm.
going to take your job.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's right, but I also think it's a little untrue. There is going to be a consolidation of labor,
Hmm.
and we have to just name that and accept that. The jobs I'm most worried about being automated are going to be, entry-level engineering, computer science, data science. These models are very
Hmm.
sophisticated. Um, they have their flaws, and they still operate like your traditional data science
Hmm.
models. Garbage in is garbage out. And right now, a lot of what they're reading is garbage, where the internet is not exactly the best place to get knowledge.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think we're gonna need more of are, like, librarians and, know how to manage data, curate the information that we're feeding into these models. That might come from academia, that might come from a whole set or a whole new
Hmm.
class of jobs that we need to create. But then you also need, of course, folks who can really get into that learning, those machine
Hmm.
learning, algorithms and pull them apart. So in early days, for example, in ILLUME, we would do predictive modeling
Hmm.
strategies to target customers to adopt different technologies. And predictive models function based on historic
Hmm.
information, right? So you're predicting your future population based on who was participating in the past. So when you apply that to a data set of customers or the public, then you
Hmm.
of course reproduce exactly the same population. You just find new members of it. you know, that's actually a really inefficient way of expanding a market. What you're trying to do when you expand your market is not just to tap who you already have at the table or who has the propensity to participate
Hmm.
or to adopt your
Hmm.
technology. You need to find those pockets in the market that are adjacent or that are up and coming behind it. And so when you start working and you think about these AI models functioning in a sort of similar way, especially language learning models and
Hmm.
others, you are going to need people who are sort of sophisticated enough to know how to open those models up to make sure that they have enough sort of
Hmm.
breadth, if you will, to see and discern what is not um, essentially a historical
Yeah.
pattern being reinterpreted.
I had an interview with a buddy of mine kind of early on in the podcast,
Hmm.
and he is he's a scientist. He's an engineer. He believed about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, he was an OG in the AI community,
Yeah,
but he was doing machine vision.
yeah,
And he thought that machine vision was going to be the breakthrough technology
yeah.
and not the large language models
Hmm.
that are, of course, prevalent now.
Yeah.
Do you see any technologies that are sort of nascent or on the periphery about to jump into the market
Mhm,
in the energy space with respect to either green energy or
mhm.
new ways of using existing technology? Is there something new on the horizon that maybe we don't know about?
I'm sure there are. I mean, obviously, everyone's talking about fusion and trying to speed that up as much as possible, because that would radically change the way we generate energy and deploy it,
Hmm.
use it. Uh, A lot of the challenges of the energy industry right now and the technologies that are innovating around it are deeply practical, like around transmission. This is the fundamental challenge of the energy industry right
Yeah.
now. Um, so in some ways, what we're seeing is a lot of optimization happening through these kinds of models. I think that's one area that we will see innovation.
Hmm.
Um, I think we may also be able to get more sophisticated in the orchestration and aggregation of energy through distributed sources.
Hmm.
So we have the emergence of virtual power plants. The promise of that hasn't yet paid off, but it's something that we're continuing to work
Hmm.
at. And in many ways, the policy imperative, this is so rare, was sort of out in front of the technology. you
Mm,
know,
interesting.
and that doesn't often happen. Usually, policy and regulation chases tech.
Hmm.
But in this case, the need is so great, and so we're starting to see that build out. And in order to proliferate
Hmm.
technologies, deploy those technologies, scale those technologies, you need a nimble regulatory environment to achieve that. We don't have that right now. And that's why we have hyperscalers moving to self-generation.
Mm,
They're
I see.
working around the system, not within the system,
Yeah, they're
right?
trying to address a need that's not being dealt with.
Yeah.
I'm going to change gears a bit
Yeah.
because I really want to understand in your growth path, you and Sarah growing the company
Yeah.
from just the two of you to
Mhm.
over 50, right?
Yeah.
Were
Just
there
about 50.
times where you wanted to quit?
Always. Always, like every other week. I
And what were
mean,
the reasons?
well, in the early days, it's all adrenaline and you're just pushing hard. So I don't think you can even see straight enough to know if you want to quit your job, right? You're just hustling. I think it's those middle years that are really challenging. When you're going from 15 people to 20, even 30 people is a dramatic change and it's a
Yeah.
cultural change. And so the hardest thing you can do in a business is change management. It truly is the most difficult thing. You
Hmm.
probably know this well. And the company you need at 15 and the company you need at 30 is really
Yeah.
different.
And I
But,
get that. Hmm.
and those are the moments, those inflection points were always like the grindiest, grittiest, hardest moments. And you would get so frustrated. And I think it was because, as leaders, you forget that your vision is clear, your intention feels really sort of lucid. You kind of know where you're going and what you want to achieve. And it's challenging to bring people along on that.
Hmm.
And it's not even about individuals. Organizations just move slowly. They just have to. People have
Hmm.
to adapt. And your organizational change, your shift in vision is, an additional challenge to their
Hmm.
daily job, right? Because they're being asked to deliver on our projects and do all this work. So it's sort of in those moments I was ready to be done. But obviously we got through it.
Yeah.
It was always for me, not surprisingly, the people challenges that woke me up at 3 a.m. It was never, do we have money or not? That never scared me. It was always like, are we doing the right thing?
Hmm.
Are we making the right decisions? Are we taking care of people the way we should? Um, how am I going to resolve this
Hmm.
conflict that's in the business? That kind of thing.
Did you learn any hard lessons with respect to personnel that you hired?
Hmm.
Either that they maybe you fired them too slowly or hired them too fast or
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, what's that? That's the adage, right? Hire slowly, fire fast.
Yeah,
I think it's very true, but it's hard to do.
it's really hard to
It's really hard to do. Um, my biggest fault is that I see potential in sort of everything, and
do.
I
Mhm,
think it comes from my tendency to be a bit of a builder, and I see that in people too. And so what I often don't do is interview to find the flaws or the
mhm,
faults or the things that aren't gonna work. And sometimes that works out really well because I can find like a shiny, up and coming
mhm.
coming star and nurture them and give them what they need. And then sometimes I'm seeing the very best of somebody and the worst is like really bad,
Yeah.
I didn't know or it wasn't what I needed. And so what I found over time was I needed to find an interview partner or somebody who was more cynical and pessimistic almost
Mhm.
to run people through interviews as well, so that I had this sort of counterbalance to
Yeah.
my personality. I also this is going to sound strange, but I kind of like to collect people. I like to convene people. And so I get excited about the prospect of adding more people
Hmm.
to a project. And that often doesn't work because you need to hire for compliments and you need to hire for
Right.
gaps and not just strengths.
Yeah, bias is hard to get over, uh, move aside when you're. I'm the same way in a hiring process. As I was growing my business years ago, I made it a point that I would have the first interview on the phone only,
Yeah.
even though we had Zoom at the time. It was
Yeah.
just barely coming online and phone only because I
Yeah.
wanted to understand like who they were. I didn't want to be biased by anything else.
Hmm.
And then I would basically remove myself further and further as the process went along
Hmm.
and have others make the decision.
Yeah.
Because I'm shiny kind of guy as well. I'm like, "Oh, man, this person could do this. I can really take all my energy and help build them up. 100% understand."
Yeah. Yeah. You have to kind of back off and know when to back off. And that actually, as a founder, it's better too. Because in the end, they're not working with you in most cases. They're
Hmm.
working with your team. And so your team has to be bought
Yeah.
into them. And frankly, they need to be attached to your team because I think it's very easy for a new employee to get excited about working with the owner or the
Hmm.
founder or the leader. And that isn't their reality because day in and day out, they're not working with you. They're working with everybody else.
Did
And so they
you
have to like that.
did you compete with eSource or was it complementary before the acquisition?
Uh, Probably a bit of both. They were in a sort of an acquisitive phase, so that changed a lot, over the course of the time. Was where they were growing before we were acquired. eSource was one of these companies that I sort of grew up alongside. They were in the industry. They've been in the industry, I think, for 30 plus years. And so when I entered, getting a speaking engagement at eSource was a really big deal because they have this event called the Forum, and it's exclusive to clients
Hmm.
for the most part, or it was. And so when I would get invited there, it was like, oh, this is a great speaking opportunity
Hmm.
because I always got work. And I had folks that I would collaborate with in those spaces to
Hmm.
run workshops and things. And so our work has always been complementary, and we always had sort of a mutual admiration society, if you
Hmm.
will, between us. And so the acquisition sort of felt like a natural fit.
How'd that conversation go? I mean,
In what sense?
the actual conversation, who opened it up, who asked who on a date, like
Yeah.
that sort of thing is always a very um, sort of like a black box
Yeah,
for a
it
lot of
is.
people
It is.
from the outside not understanding.
Yeah.
And the more I've talked to them, it's usually not that sort of a black box when you really understand that it just kind of either happens or there's like that moment where you got that email, or how did it go for you?
Well, our space is really acquisitive right now, so there's a lot of consolidation happening. Like all spaces, they tend to go through these phases, right? There's consolidation, and then businesses spin off, and then we
Hmm.
reconsolidate. So we're kind of at the end of one of those moments. So that is to say that we were getting a lot of outreach in general.
Hmm.
Um, and our space is reliable when the economy is not. And so when things feel a little uncertain, you get more outreach. So during this period of time and not really understanding what the political landscape would
Hmm.
look like, a lot of investors were knocking on our door and probably all of our competitors' doors and everyone else's, right? And so when eSource reached out, it was really the first conversation that we were willing to
Hmm.
entertain because it felt like a real fit. It felt
Yeah.
practical, and we knew their organization and had worked alongside them for a long time. And when Sarah and I had thought about an exit, we always wanted to go with a strategic rather than an investor. I mean, of course, we had at some point like ideas about becoming a platform
Hmm.
company ourselves, but we were too small and didn't necessarily want to govern the organization for another like 5 to 10 years to get there.
If someone would have told you at 22, 24, 25 years old
Yeah.
that you would have gone along this path, what would you have
No
said?
way. I was a nanny at 24, 25. At entering graduate school, I was a kind of, I grew up in a community of like a very working class community, and my dad ran a nonprofit and my mom, taught 3rd grade. And so all of my upbringing and sort of priming for me was around service. Like, how do you create a better environment for the people around you. And I wouldn't say that I'd abandoned that by any means, but I never thought I'd be working in business.
Mhm.
I thought I'd maybe go into advocacy, maybe I'd be in an NGO. But when I went to graduate school, I really loved research as a catalyst for change and thinking about it as a way of kind of understanding strategy.
Mhm.
But leaving undergrad, I just didn't know how to get a job. I mean, really, I didn't have any sense of it. And I felt like I didn't quite know how to sell my skills. My family had just gone through a major disruption, so I was also, like, maybe not in the best emotional place. So I think if I looking back, I there's no way I would have never thought this
Yeah,
was where I would be. Um, but I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of,
you should
like,
be.
I don't think I think I did all these things and still kept true to some of those
Mhm.
orientations, and that's, like, what I kinda hold to.
Are you a hopeful person?
Oh, absolutely.
You think we're gonna be okay?
I think so. Oh, no. My biggest marital fight was have you read Cormac McCarthy's The Road?
No, I have not.
Okay, well, it's a devastating book, but it's beautifully written, so it's worth reading.
Okay.
But just prepare yourself for it. You're gonna need downtime afterwards. But there's this scene where it's a nuclear holocaust, and there's this scene where this family of 3 are trying to make a decision about what they're gonna do, and the mom decides she doesn't wanna go on, and so she kinda takes herself into the field and, like, takes care of herself, and the dad and the son sort of persist. And so my conversation with my husband was like, "All right, if this happens, who are you in this relationship?" And
Mhm.
he's like, "Oh, I'm the wife. I'm not gonna try to fight this to the
Yeah.
end." And I was like, "Oh my god, I'm the dad." I was like, "It's gonna be just me and my daughter, and we're gonna be in the nuclear holocaust alone trying to find the sea." But I'm like that level of
Mhm.
optimist. I'm like, "We can get
Yeah.
there. We will find the sea. It will be okay."
Yeah.
You know, and there's never a point to tap out. It's, like, not an option.
Yeah.
And I mean that metaphorically,
Of
obviously.
course.
But I just I really believe in people even when people are really dark, and I feel like we're in a kind of a dark moment,
Mhm.
um, of humanity, and I said to a neighbor of mine, I was like, "Well, this is just our time to walk through this, like, every generation has to go through these huge
Yeah.
changes geopolitically, socially, economically.
Mhm.
We are in the middle of one, and but we're gonna be okay."
Yeah. I kind of agree with you that we're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
As we start to fold down the podcast here,
Yeah.
give us an idea. If you were to have a nice dinner
Yeah.
with somebody, anyone in this world that ever lived, who would that be?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I have an answer to that question. I'm really into perfect strangers.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the person who will sit down to next to somebody at the bar and just, like, hear their whole life
Mhm.
story and learn about them, and I love that. I find that really incredible. So there
Mhm.
aren't many people I sort of admire in that way, but I do kind of love everybody. And I know that sounds like a bit of a cop out, but
No.
I would um, really just love to connect with somebody and hear about their life.
Yeah.
Um, and in my perfect world, it would be I would have made dinner, we would have a great drink, and I would just hear all the things.
I would love to see that happen with Elon Musk and you.
Oh no. Maybe my no list is bigger than my yes list.
Yeah, I get it. I'm very much the same way as far as,
Yeah.
talking to people, strangers. I do it
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
If you had to give some life lessons
Yeah.
to, we'll say, young, entrepreneurial-minded
Mhm.
men or women, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
what would you tell them? Especially in this time, this situation we're in right now, and all that you know about business, what would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, if you're starting something, I would say make sure it's something, and I can't take credit for this. Somebody else said this, but it stuck. Like something you would walk over glass for. That you feel passionate about it and that you are committed enough to it that you will keep pushing because it gets ugly and it's hard and it's scary at many points in time. So if you don't have that kind of energy for the project that you're engaging in, it may not be the project you should be engaging in. And that's not to say there's not one out there, but I think that's really important. And it doesn't have to be business. It could be at any point in your life. Um, your passion and your talents have to be able to carry you through. I just saw Reese Witherspoon said something that I thought was really smart, which was, don't chase your dreams, chase your talents. And I think I would also maybe add to that, chase what you have energy for, and that can look really differently. So for me, for example, it took me a long time to realize that I love research intellectually, but I'm passionate about convening people and change making, like building things and creating things. So if I were still working as a researcher, I'd probably be very unhappy because I'm working alone, I'm working quietly, I'm rarely working in teams, but I'm passionate about people. So anything I can do to kind of move toward that and building things that involve sort of ecosystems of people, I get very excited. And that drove me in business. So you have to know yourself, I think, really well to know what you can achieve. Not because we can't all do something, but you don't want to get on the other side of a major investment and end up miserable.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a very fascinating conversation.
It was fun.
And thanks for sharing your insights with us and really some unique perspectives that I believe you're uniquely qualified to give.
Thanks.
So thank you for your time.
Yeah, this was fun.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers.